The devil is real. May God have mercy on us all.
First of all, I do have to talk with this film. It is scary. It is definitely going there. I think Andre has described it as aliens on a boat, except for the, happens to be like the aliens that it's Dracula. But talk
Exactly.
about you sort of joining in it. Was that sort of the appeal to it, horror in general, or was it maybe what you saw in the character?
Oh, it was a little bit of both, to be honest, and a lot of Andre's vision. First of all, when I read the script, and I know it's been around for a long time, I saw this incredible character in Clemens, an opportunity that I thought was important for us to just go after. You don't have to hit the nail over the head with it, but he's a black man, a black Cambridge-educated doctor at the turn of the century. And I
Mm,
think that was important because these men existed. And so part of it was also the research and conversations with Andre and our producers who also wanted to make space for that. And I thought that was
mm.
great and important, especially in the horror genre, because we're not always centered in that way. And it was great to watch this man who I think is an outsider, who I think he represents the other, and Dracula represents the other. Also, the one woman on board, played by Aisling Anna, she represents the other. And so there's this dynamic there that I thought was just incredible. And then also it's I'm a horror nerd, I'm a horror geek. I never pictured myself actually like doing it, and this being my first sort of real sort of leading in this way. Because I've been a part of some really cool big franchises, but to be a part of bringing Dracula back is awesome. And also with my first film, seeing my first time being introduced to a vampire was Blackula in the 1970s,
Wow.
William Marshall and that blaxploitation era. So I just think it's cool to now. I mean, I didn't see it in the 1970s. I saw it, when I was alive, but the VHS, rocked it to the tape pop. But
No,
it's,
that's the way it goes.
but it's one of those things that for me was just incredibly special, and it's just a great opportunity.
I think what's so interesting about it too is the fact that it is a Dracula movie, but you don't even know that's the movie that you're really in until about halfway through. It's like
Uh,
it really does take a while to sort of uncover that. But one of the things we sort of see from the trailer is at one point you're like, we're gonna kill this thing, which is obviously like, as anyone in a horror movie, I'm just like not looking at that guy as like this is the guy that's gonna save the day because it seems like a dumb proposition. But that's like such a great scene in the movie. But as an actor, like the movie lives or dies by that moment because that is the moment when it's like we fight back. Set that up for us, and just knowing again, this is why you watch the movie for when they fight back.
when they fight back. What the crazy thing is, here's the thing: Clemens is a doctor. He is ill-equipped to he doesn't even like guns. So it's like, bruh, you gonna do what? You gonna okay? And that's the great part is like you get to watch this guy figure that out. He goes from a scientist, a person who believes in science, a doctor, to who doesn't believe in the supernatural, to a believer, to then a hunter, right? Like he becomes that. And it's because he has to. It's because he's had to learn to adapt in life. And he grew up on boats. And so he's an underdog. And like, you're right. Like you watch him in the trailer, you like, here you go. Like, you gonna do what? Like, we all know how it ends,
Yeah.
bro. But
Yeah.
you watch that journey, and that's the thing. This movie pulls the rug out from under you because you know the ending before you think you know the ending, but you don't know that, and so it sets it up in a really cool way. And it's just a great device, But that's the thing. He finds that constitution in himself where everybody on that ship is doubting him and doubting his presence and doubting his existence almost, and believing in this other thing. He's like, no, he's wrestling that back and taking that power.
Yeah.
He's facing that evil. And I think that's really, really cool.
I mean, it is really cool, but I'm not gonna lie to you. I was just thinking of this poor person. But one person that you have with you, who I think has the appropriate amount of fear, is the character of Anna, brought to you by Aisling, because like she really like
She
gives
gets it.
this like she gets it, and every one of these stories needs this one person. This is like the Ripley character in a lot of ways, being like, you do not understand. This is a problem. We all need to leave.
Listen, women been saving our hides for a long time. You know, she's the woman on board who is literally telling these men what is right in front of their faces, and they don't want to see it, including Clemens. And so,
yeah,
you know, I mean, it's a story as old as time, but it's one of those things that I think makes her she's a great actress. I mean, Aisling is literally one of my favorite actresses. I was so glad we got to rock together on this film. But you have this character literally telling you what it is and reminding us the danger and the horror. But that's the thing. That's the thing that because here's the other side of it. It's like, what she's telling us is like, do you really expect me to believe that there's some monster who is calculating this and rationing? Come on. Like, yeah. So, you know, you can understand a bit of the skepticism. But it's interesting.
To a point, but then there's the point where they all have to like get on board. I did want to add this really quick though before we get out of here is the fact that you all are like literally living in these accents, right? And you have the same dialect coach as the one from Macbeth. This is like such a different British accent because it has to be period and also of a certain class, but not quite. Like, talk about the dialect.
Kate Wilson, I actually worked with her at Juilliard as a student, broke college student, like back in the day. She's worked with me on Broadway several times on Broadway and also on a couple other films. But then we did Macbeth together, the Shakespeare film. And when they asked me to do Demeter, I was like, we got to bring on Kate. And so Kate worked with all of us on it. And you're right, it's period, but it's also, there's no recordings there's rare recordings from that period from sailors, let alone a Black Cambridge educated doctor who, in my backstory, also, you know, had roots he grew up on ships, you know, the Black community of sailors in Portsmouth or wherever, you know, so it's a very specific thing, and we had to work from a lot of different materials and phonetics and pulling together what this is, because I couldn't just listen to, you know, the Brits now. Like, you know, it's a different thing, that accent, and we might hear that now and say, oh, well, that's different from that, so he's not doing, but it's a very specific calibrated thing, and it was also just a pleasure because as Black American actors, we don't get the opportunity to do that often.
Fair.
And so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna run towards it and see what happens, and yeah.
Great job. Getting one back for Idris, as we will say. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm just messing. Thank you so much, back Corey. I mean, that dude's been doing American accents and got like since the 90s practically. Like that.
You say Idris?
Idris, yeah.
Oh, he a legend. He can do his accent, his American accent better than mine. So, you know, he's great.
We no longer plot our course. The devil below does. And we all know where he plans to deliver us. To hell, Mr. Clemens.
Liam, I'm going to start with you because this is obviously a Dracula. This is a horror story, but your character and your performance, it's a little bit more because you also are narrator to this. So it's like a very intense voice acting performance. I think that's so interesting that your character goes through those various points because he really is what brings us into the story and lets us know that like trouble is afoot.
Yes, it's a good point you make. And your audience should know that the reason I'm narrating is because the entire movie is based on one chapter in the book, which is the captain's log. And that's where and it's very sparse in the book. It's this log where he says one of our guys is missing. There's something malevolent on this. So it was in honor of the book that my narration takes place. The character of Elliot, which we have to kind of build from the ground up, is he's a decent man. These are merchant seamen. They're blue collar guys who deliver packages and merchandise around the world. And they're visited by this horrific beast who treats the ship like his refrigerator. And that's I think that's what's really interesting. These decent men. And there's not a wasted character on board on this ship. They're all kind of good people. And I think that's what's important. You can have whatever monster you want. And as David has said before, and I've said, if you don't have people you care about, you're not going to care about the film. And I think you care about these people.
Yeah, I was going to say, Wojciech's, that character is an interesting one because I think on this boat, whenever there's something afoot, there's going to be people that are instant to believe, people are less likely to believe, and most people somewhere in between. But sort of watching your character sort of evolve on his thoughts about the presence was definitely one that was interesting, and probably more interesting to you as a character, because let's be real, this is it's an ensemble in a lot of ways, and the sense of like you want to have a moment, but your character really does, like, the moment is watching him basically come to the realization that this is really happening because he's the sort of first mate, and if this didn't happen, he was about to become a captain.
With the Last Voyage of the Demeter, being that it's an ensemble piece and being that there's all these, different voices and opinions about how stuff works, it's like the real world. You've got people who are very superstitious. You've got people who are like, there's a scientific approach to this. How are we gonna vanquish this thing that's threatening all of our lives? And here comes this guy, Clements, this educated man who looks different from me, who in my opinion doesn't belong on board a ship, who's trying to tell me how to do things. And unfortunately for Wojciech, he's come to find that there is a way you do things. This is how a boat works. This is how life operates. This is who belongs where. My captain, my hero, my mentor is starting to fall apart. People are starting to go missing. The way that I've myopically focused on denying evidence, in spite of the fact that it's starting to literally leave puddles of blood on the deck of my ship, has been detrimental to the success of Dracula himself. So coming to that realization and coming to the acceptance of the fact that there is something beyond my understanding that I am powerless over is, and was for me as an actor, an incredible thing to tap into. And this might seem like a grand metaphor, but for anyone who's watching who gets the metaphor, for me as a recovering addict and somebody 21 years into recovery, it's so funny how you could be so focused on this is the way this works. None of that BS is true. And that's when you're most vulnerable. That's when you're most in danger. And I love that I get to go on the journey where I recognize that Clements isn't just my ally. He's actually the guy who has the answers that I never realized I needed. And I find a friend in him before we reach the end of the last voyage of the Demeter.
Yeah, the interesting thing about both of you guys in this is that where we start you and where we end you in this story is just so different. And watching these characters, and that's for every character in this, not just your two, everyone is in a different place. But the one thing that's sort of centered is your dedication to the Demeter, your pair of dedication to the ship, to its crew, to various degrees. So Liam, I'll start with you. They really sort of embody the idea of like, there's something here to protect. Like, they're the people that are like, we have to stay the course. And it's almost because of their love of sailing that makes it to where, again, it's part of the engine, as it will, the plot. The fact that they're like, we've been through harder times.
Yeah, very much so. You have to remember that people that do difficult jobs like that leave their families and go off, military people, people in all sort of walks of life, they find a comfort in those people they work with, that they live with 24 hours a day. They have to get on. It is their family. It's their second family. In some cases, it's their only family. And Wojciech is like that. And with Elliot, he's come to the end of that journey at the beginning of the movie and is handing over the reins to their home, to Wojciech, which is obviously before we come across our friend who's coming out to destroy all that. So the setup for this drama is magnificent. And when he does show up, this is not the Dracula that we've seen many, many times. This is not a seducer in a cape, an attractive man who's mysterious and somehow magnetic. What we have is a force of nature, a beast, a malevolent, amoral animal who's after these unfortunate, decent men. And I think that makes for seriously good drama.
One of the things I think is also really interesting is the way that André has done Dracula. He brought back his collaborator, Javier, who's, again, embodies the monster on set. He definitely talked about how it makes it more real. David, I have to ask you, because you do get to do a lot of sort of like the body acting with this version of Dracula. That is not something where you really have to act too hard, I would imagine.
It's such a gift. It's so cool. I'm a kid who grew up addicted to monster movies. My earliest heroes in cinema were Lon Chaney, who would vanish into the makeup of his work. Bela Lugosi, obviously, as a great Dracula, but look at Boris Karloff and how he vanished into Frankenstein's monster. So seeing Javier, who I've admired his work, I'm a big fan already, become Dracula. And the work that Joran and the rest of the makeup effects team did craft this Nosferatu come vampire bat come demon look with Andre was so cool. And it's dimly lit. We're in the hold of a ship. A lot of my battling with Dracula is taking place under the deck or late at night. And so he's moving in the shadows, and the way that guy uses his body and has such a control over his instrument is, ooh, man, yeah, I was scared.
You were I would only imagine. All right, real quick before I get out of here, favorite Dracula that you've gotten to see? Liam, David, real quick.
Oh, with me, it's a bit like the James Bond thing. You know, Sean Connery was my James Bond. Christopher Lee was my Dracula until I came across Javier. It's now Javier.
What about you, David?
I'm going to go, I love Chris Lee. He's a hero to me, but I've got Bela on my socks today, so Bela Lugosi. We'll go back to Bela. Christopher Lee's my very close, but Bela Lugosi. Liam can have Chris, and I'll take Bela.
He is here, Mr. Clements. The thing that wears the skin of a man. In the night, it drinks our blood, and he is on this ship. Which means that we will never leave it.
I heard you describe this as basically Alien on a ship. Was that sort of like something that really just intrigued you about the story to begin with? Like, talk about your history and how you sort of started with the project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's when I read the script, which I was lucky enough to even read. And then it was definitely this idea of creating, to portray Dracula in a way you've never seen him before, as this monster on a ship. You know, in story terms, it's kind of like Alien. Yeah, you're out on a ship, there is nothing around, you cannot escape. You know, it's a blueprint in a way for creating tension and for creating contained environment, to create a horror movie. I just wanted to make the scariest Dracula movie I've seen. That was my goal.
Yeah, and that's so funny too, because you wanted to make the scariest Dracula movie, but then you also were not really like married to one version of Dracula, as it were. We see like various iterations. Was that also something from like the early days of this script? Because we really do see a metamorphosis of even what we call Dracula in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a way, he is a sophisticated aristocrat, because that's what he is in Romania. That's what he is in London. But I think we had to focus on just the monster aspect of him and tell this journey of this old, fragile man who has gotten himself into a journey he wasn't, in a way, maybe quite prepared for. And he's in dire trouble when he loses his blood supply, Anna, and he has to start attacking the crew to survive. Yeah. But then at some point, he does gain the powers. He does become the demonic force of nature that he is. And then he ends up, becoming the ultimate version of Dracula. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting too, because throughout these various iterations, you're back with Javier, and I dare to say this, and I know this is like a lot of comparisons considering that you produce Scary Stories Tell in the Dark with Guillermo del Toro, but I see a pairing of you and Javier that could be as similar of his with Doug Jones, like just this idea of like creature performers following these monster creators throughout films. Is that something that sort of intrigues you as well?
Javier would be at the top of my mind, any movie that had, but also not just as a creature performer. He's a great actor. I mean, he's a really great actor.
What do you think that he brings particularly to these performances that really sort of shines out in the Dracula?
I mean, he has a nuance about his body movement, and he has obviously his look is very unique. He thinks like the character, he behaves like the character, he really lives the character on screen. When you're working with him on set, and when he's portraying take by take by take, he gives you sometimes surprising choices that he comes up with on the spot that you can film for a couple of minutes maybe, and actually do 7-8 takes in a go without breaking the camera. And he would just give you versions and versions of how Dracula could behave. And it's because he has all these things in his mind and in his body, and his knowledge of what a creature what he can do with his body is also totally unique. So
I think it must be interesting too for the scene partners. I mean, look, Corey, Aisling, like everyone in this production for the most part they're very seasoned performers, and so they've definitely seen folks doing creature performances. They've seen heavy makeup performances. Did you have any of them remark about how different it is? Because it is very different when you have it the way you have it on set here, where like literally he is just the monster. There's not like a character that you're really interacting with, but it almost makes it like you can really suspend disbelief if you want to.
Yeah, and I remember when we were shooting the scene when Woody gets bitten, we didn't want, and Woody didn't want to see Javier. He had met him many times, but he didn't want to see him in costume until the camera was rolling. So we were literally keeping him off the set while we started the camera rolling, and Woody doesn't know what he's facing, and then he walks in out of the shadows on, you know, when it's happening on camera to capture his reaction in a proper way and the fear he has in his eyes when he sees him the first time. And it's just it was a way to make it all work.
Yeah, and Woody who plays Toby, the young boy in this one, correct? And he, like, I think folks will recognize him from Come On and other kind of stuff. But I think it's so interesting because this film, like, I'll just put it, you guys are pulling no punches, right? Is that correct? Like, you guys are really, I would just say that if this is going about making the scariest Dracula movie, you're taking the scariest sort of like elements from everything that they've mentioned before and really sort of going for it. Was that also something that you really had to, because I'll just put it this way. This is not scary stories to tell in the dark. This is not a teen, like, this is a hard R scary movie. And you guys really lean into that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was so happy that everyone embraced the deaths in the movie, because there are a couple of ones that I'm sure is going to be talked about, maybe, you know, at least reacted to. And
yeah,
I
that's
think,
very true.
Yeah. And I think, but I think that's, you know, we have to portray things in the way we believe is the best story. You know, it's.
I really do think, again, this is going to get folks talking about it. The thing I just want to, you know, make sure that I say before we get out of here is this idea that you have in horror great collaborators. It's such a collaborative filmmaking process, but the best part is talking to other horror heads about it. And this, again, is going to be a movie that's going to get people talking. One person that you probably talked about with this one was Guillermo del Toro, who I know sort of like recommended you for this project. Talk a little bit about, like, just a filmmaker to filmmaker, any conversations you had with him about this.
I mean, very little. He got so busy with Nightmare Alley around the time by the time I got into this. But it was, you know, he's been he's been very supportive, and he recommended me, and it was all. I wouldn't have been making it without his recommendations. So, you know, I'm in great depth to him for sure.
Have you gotten a chance to let him see it yet?
No, and I'm looking forward to that. Actually, I hope he. You know, I'm also scared of it.
I get it. Fair enough. Actually, fair enough. Thank you so much, André.